Hey everybody, Kit Merker here from Noble 9, and I am joined today by internet famous legend Steve Yegge. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, Kit. Hey, folks. Thanks for having me.
We wanted to talk today a little bit about reliability in gaming. That's what the topic du jour, and I wanted to kind of get your take on that. But maybe before we jump into that, maybe just what have you been up to lately? What are you working on these days?
Well, I am semi-retired, and I've been working on a game, a multiplayer game that's been online for about 25 years. So I've gone through pretty much all of the things that you can go through, in terms of failures and adventures and things like that. And we're getting ready for a big sort of release. We're in beta right now, so that's kind of where we're at.
Well, we can drop a link to it maybe in the YouTube. What's the game called?
It's called Wyvern, and it's available on the App Store and Play Store and on Steam.
Excellent. Okay, we'll have to check that out, and we'll make sure to put a link in the comments. So let's get to this topic. When you think about reliability in gaming, I think you'd probably agree that a lot of the focus in game development is on the game. But where do you think the reliability piece comes in, and are there any challenges in building reliable games that's different than other kinds of software development? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, the game industry has been a little behind, I think, the rest of the tech industry here, because the game industry has been focused on games, and games are a big, complicated stack. They have 3D engines, and they have thousands of artists and storytellers, and they're building these worlds, and you can imagine that they can get really carried away with this and not think at all about the reliability angle, right? And they're like, oh yeah, we need to have a multiplayer component, and and pretty much all games do at this point. Even if it's a single player game, they almost always have a multiplayer mode, and so right there they're square in reliability territory.
Well, what are the main culprits of outages these days? Is it mostly network issues or Wi-Fi, that kind of stuff, or software releases? What's causing the downtime?
Yeah, so the traffic tends to be really bursty. Okay, it's predictable. So it's sort of like ride hailing. It has really predictable times of day. Or you look at Amazon retail. People are always ordering right after lunch. And then at dinner time there's a big burst. And so, it's somewhat predictable, but it can also be spiky because some Twitch streamer or YouTube influencer can get online and go, hey, everybody come look at this. And all of a sudden you just got crushed, right? So it's not entirely predictable. And so what happens is, I mean, there's all of the reasons that you just listed, can contribute to, why you might have an outage. You might have a carrier problem, with your telco, right? You might have, any level in the network stack. But, the most obvious ones that happen again and again are they're kind of sloppiness, right? They're not you forget to update your SSL certs and your database is locked out, right? Or uh, you do a software update like you mentioned, and it's not adequately tested, or you don't have the right monitoring in place, right? Or you fundamentally just didn't architect it for the right level of scale, and you didn't even know until you got hit by a massive scale, right? That's a huge problem.
Well, is there? We were chatting before we turned the camera on. I know you had some war stories of big outages that happened. Anything maybe you can share about one particular one that came to
Yeah,
mind?
sure. I mean, like, okay, so I'll share two really quickly. One is it happened to us, to my game, when we did I think it was our iOS launch. And the game was getting more and more steam and more traction, and all the old players were coming back, and it was really exciting. And all of a sudden, one day, like, our services stopped being available. And, I was on App Engine at the time, and I didn't know what was going on. And, it turned out our quotas were getting exhausted. It's a really common problem, right? You put in some sort of quota, so just to make sure that you don't get slammed with $1 million bill at the end of some week, right? And and the quotas would get exhausted by 10 in the morning, and we couldn't play anymore for the rest of the day. And so we did some digging and found that we were getting sort of bot DOS attacked. We never did figure out who it was or why they cared. Our game wasn't really that big, but you're gonna find that there are systems out there, automated systems that will basically stress test for you in prod without your permission at any given time. Okay. Amazon, there's a famous Amazon war story about how once their traffic started to go up and 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 up, and they piled SREs on it and just kept adding machines, and they traced it back to a large, foreign country that was stress testing. I'm not going to say which one, but it's a country that wanted to know how much capacity basically Amazon had before they went down. And, and they realized that eventually they had to let their system fail because this country was generating infinite sort of demand as part of their test. Okay. And so whenever it happens, they just sort of they actually, they had to set it up to route that traffic to a particular place, that would just let it dissipate. Right. So, that happened to me, some tiny little shop at a small scale. Somebody was hitting my service over and over again. I mean, not very often, maybe once a second, but it exhausted my quota, after a couple of hours, right? So all kinds of weird stuff can happen. But the big war story, the one that everybody thinks of when you talk about reliability, is the Pokemon Go Fest 2017 in Chicago, which, had 20,000 people come from all over the country for some big launch of, Pokemon Go. My buddy Ron Bronstein was working at the company at the time. And, so I got a little bit of an insider's view there. And, 20,000 people showed up. The tickets were going for $400 with scalpers. And there was a line 3 miles long. And the system just nobody could log in. It just went down hard. I mean, their servers melted. Their carriers were having problems. Nobody could get in. And there was a class action suit. And they wound up having to shell out over $1.5 million, US dollars to the disappointed customers. But who cares about the $1.5 million? It's the loss of trust. How many players did they lose? I was shared a graph, right, and they just massive drop off as people lost interest in the game after that, right? So reliability can really, really, really hurt your brand. Okay, if you have a reliability, and if you step back and you look at the brands that are the most trusted, whether it's Amazon, Google, whoever, they have, massive investments in reliability. And there's a correlation there, a strong correlation, right? People don't trust stuff that seems flaky. And the same thing goes for games. People get upset and they don't play your game anymore. And you just lost not just customers, but you've got bad will now. People go tell their friends, I don't play that game, it sucks, right? And word of mouth means everything in this industry, So there's my war story.
There's a great war story. It makes me think, you talked a bit about a couple things that are interesting. There's, you talked about investment. You talked about kind of the cost, right? The disappointment, the trust of your gamers, which this is really the essence. I mean, when you get down to it, a game, it sounds like fun and games, but it's a business is what we're talking about, because you've got costs and you've got revenue and these things to worry about. And there's no such thing, I think we'd agree, there's no such thing as a perfectly reliable game, perfectly reliable system. You're going to have to, make some trade-offs somewhere. No question about it. You don't have an infinite budget, clearly. So how do you think about that? How do you think about the decision-making of these hard trade-offs, right? Between, do I work on this cool new loot box or whatever versus, hiring an SRE to help with the team versus, fixing some technical debt? How does that come into play? How do you make those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Kit. And you can't make those decisions without data. Okay, you have to be data driven because your PMs won't let you. Your business owners won't let you say, well, we need to spend money on this invisible infrastructure stuff that you engineers keep whining about because we've got features, right? That's just how businesses work, right? If they can't see it and if they can't see how it impacts them, then and how you see it is through data, through monitoring and through reporting and alerting and all the trappings of great the hallmarks of great reliability systems, right? So yeah, that's how you make the decisions, and then you take the data and you look at it and you say, hey, we had a good month. We only had one outage, and you do postmortems on everything. Here's the thing, man. Everybody, and probably in the game industry, I would get people go into the game industry early and they stay there, and it's fairly insular and it's sort of disconnected from the rest of the industry, right? It's its own thing, and so they've been kind of maybe missing the party on how reliability has evolved because it keeps evolving, it keeps changing, right? You know how hard it is to set up a microservice today, right? I mean, like you would think that it would just be like snap your fingers, right? Oh, there's systems that promise that, whether it's hosted Kubernetes or whether it's Amazon Functions, Lambdas, Google Functions, whatever. But the reality is, we found at Grab, my last company, right, which is a pretty good sized ride hailing company in Southeast Asia, that the state of the art is terrible, and yet the game industry lagged behind the state of the art by another 5, 10 years, right? Yeah, probably 5 years at this point. So, my advice would be go figure out how the industry is doing reliability, and figure it out this year, because it's different this year than it was last year. There's some principles and tenets. I should have a book sitting next to me. Everybody's got the SRE book sitting next to their if they care about reliability, like the Google one.
Do you think that the SRE approach applies to gaming? Do you think it would help? Because it seems to me like a lot of the quality focus in gaming, there's performance focus and this kind of stuff. The SRE model is really kind of for cloud. And I agree with you that like a big part of gaming is cloud, but it is also a multifaceted thing, right? You've got the 3D graphics and the animation and the mobile things, and depending on what kind of game it is. But do you think the SRE model translates to gaming? Is it general purpose enough?
That's a great question. So the Google SRE model probably isn't for everybody, gaming or not. Okay, what we found is that many of the things that Google has been super successful at just would not work for other companies. And Amazon doesn't really have an SRE model, to my knowledge. Okay, Amazon is just like you built that service, you run that service. You got the pager. And that's probably a model that works better for most organizations, right? Because finding good SREs is really, really hard, right? Because they're like a superset of your regular fungible engineer. They have to know all this other stuff too, and they're in high demand, and the industry has gone completely crazy. You can't hire anybody now, right? I mean, it's like this comp package has gone through the roof. So I would say no, that model is probably not good for most companies. Well, you really
by the way on that. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
You want a system that can help you. You want automation support. You want packages that you can just turn on and will help do your SRE for you. Really.
It leads me to a question, which is what are you doing with your game? In terms of SRE.
So I have a team of about 15 people, and I would say 2 of them are more or less full time on infrastructure. Okay, so between those 2 and myself, we have the pager rotation, and we have all the alerting set up, and we sort of keep things clean, and keep the house clean. It's a constant battle, man. I mean, like, you get something fixed and then it pops up again later, or you get it fixed forever and then the next thing pops up. There's always another issue, and it's because changing things breaks things. That's why at Google, when you and I were at Google, man, all the SREs like hated it when we pushed stuff, right? They're like, no, right? No, we just got it working, And so it's like, it's a hard problem, right? Because you want to iterate, you want to be creative, you want to get things out there, and every single launch is a potential disaster for your company, right? And the only way that you can get this, really squared away, there's a certain amount that you can do in terms of like protecting yourself against knowing that you're going to have outages and having protection against it. If you have an offline mode that the players can play in, if you look, you want to try to avoid a hard failure, right? Just write everything down and everyone's just like standing around going, hey, where does your company go, right? You want to avoid that. You want to have, graceful degradation. And it's an art. You could spend. You read the Google SRE book. You can do a lot of work to make it so that your systems are resilient. Okay. Yeah. But in the end, you're going to have some outages, and you need to know about them quickly, right? You need to find out. Oh my God, I had an outage, and you need to find out which component of your system it was that went down as quickly as possible. Because your engineers, the first, there's 3 a.m, or what? Maybe it's lunch rush, right? But they're, and they're awake, but they're looking around like, okay, if you're not prepared for this, like, it could take them hours to get to the root cause, right?
Yeah.
And during that time, your brand is eroding, you're losing money, everything's, I don't know. Is this what you're kind of getting at, Kit?
Well, it is exactly what I'm getting at, because I hear a lot. I talk to a lot of people in the reliability. We had SlowConf recently. We talk to a lot of people about this stuff, and one resounding piece of feedback I get is, well, we're not Google, right? And yet we still have the same challenges. And you're bringing up a great point, which is that there's lots of ways to kind of skin the cat, if you know what I'm saying, in terms of how you make your system reliable. But they all boil down to some fundamental truths. And
That's
I think understanding the trade-offs, I think, is one. Expecting failure is another. Using data and learning from data and doing that. And I think there's a really kind of a subtle point you were making, which is that the reliability investments are invisible. And I think this is a really powerful thing to realize: is how do you make the outcome of reliability visible? Because the system being up, like even when it's quiet, right? You have to care. You have to care about performance and reliability, resiliency, etc. Even when the system is working, and that, I think, is where one of the biggest challenges. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, man, I'm going to share a war story, and I just want to preface it by saying that I have tremendous respect for my previous employer, Grab. They really are executing well, and they're an amazing company. They're going to become, I think, the Amazon of Southeast Asia, right? They're doing food and shopping and e-commerce, and they're doing financial services, and they're just a powerhouse, right, for 650 million people. So not a small company, but they had a really interesting problem because, their founders weren't technical, and they were from Harvard Business School, right? And they're great at what they do, but they weren't technical. And so trying to explain something like, hey, why is our system always down, to them it was an interesting educational experience in both directions, because they would say, okay, look, you can't have any outages. And we'd say, well, that's not actually possible, right? And they're like, well, why not? Right? And so you have to have this conversation, and and it's a negotiation, right?
That's right.
You have to basically negotiate for your uptime, your SLA, right? And they were like, well, we want 4 nines. We've heard 4 nines is really good, right? And it is. And we're like, look, you have to explain the whole. A buddy of mine named Dave Glick gave this really, really cool talk at Amazon back in like 1999. Okay, so he was way ahead of the curve. And he said it was called "Why Your Availability Sucks." Okay, and all the Amazon engineers, there weren't many of us then, showed up, and he gave us the basic, the talk, which was, if this system is 90% available, and this system's 90% available, and this system, then the overall availability is the product of their availabilities, 0.9 times 0.9 times. So it's like 0.5, right? You're down half the time. And so, and that was a big wake-up call for everyone, right? So we had this conversation with the founders, at Grab, and I had to, we had to try to find almost like metaphors to say, look, I can promise to look both ways before I cross the street. I can promise to stop at all the stoplights, right? I can promise to be careful. I can't promise that I won't get hit by a car. There could be some drunk driver or a guy have a heart attack and smack into me on the sidewalk. That's how reliability is. You can't promise people that a forklift isn't going to cut the fiber optic cable to the Grand Hyatt Hotel where your data center is hosted.
It's exactly right. And what I think is interesting is moving away from this idea of SLAs as insurance policies, right? And really trying to think of it as these contractual protections where we don't, you said it about the Pokemon story, right? We don't really care about the $1.5 million. We care about the brand reputation. Some of these things are worth so much more. And if we're even having the conversation about, are we going to meet the SLA, we're having the wrong conversation, frankly, right? The question is like, these gamers, these users, whoever they are, your Grab folks, what do they expect? What's reasonable? And what can you, where can you make the investment? And I think the really fundamental question I've been asking a lot, and it's kind of a rude question, I'd love to hear your take on this. How much unreliability can you get away with?
Yes,
right?
No, that is the question. That is the question. We asked that question over and over again, which in different ways, right? But it was really, how much can you tolerate, right? Because the more nines you try to add to your overall availability, the more dollar signs you add to the investment that it's going to take to get there. Okay, there's a direct non-linear correlation. It's like super linear. You will have to spend increasing amounts of money chasing diminishing returns on availability.
I have to introduce you to an idea that I think I coined, which I call the NASA point. So if you think of your like business expense and then the reliability cost, the point that those two things intersect, right? Where you basically
That's
spend,
right.
I call it the NASA point because only if you're sending a man to the moon can you spend all available resources on reliability. And even
Hmm.
then, by the way, they don't get it right. So there you go, the NASA point.
Yeah, that's right.
Slightly morbid, sorry.
No, but but it's a very reasonable way to look at it, right? Is the intersection of those things, and your customers, are going to they're going to tolerate a certain amount of. Look, we had to have this really interesting conversation with the Grab folks, which was that any outage that was less than 30 seconds long was effectively invisible to the customers because the telcos were having outages so often just for regular service in Indonesia and wherever, right? That people were just kind of used to like stuff just hanging for 30 seconds once in a while. So
Yeah.
if Grab, suddenly had a service outage that lasted, 20 seconds, to us it's like, oh my God, the system was down, but to the users it was like, oh, I was stuck for a sec. So
Yeah.
should you even count that in your availability numbers and things like that, right? So you got to look at
Yeah.
the whole context. You got to look at your gamers. You got to look at and how they play and how they engage with the game and how much sort of tolerance they have for downtime, right? And
Yep.
what form that takes.
And those expectations change over time, I think, is the other important thing, right? So if you can control your decisions about where you put extra, like you say, it doesn't make sense when you have a operating environment that has low reliability to over engineer your system and spend that extra resource when the customers, the users, the gamers are not going to even necessarily notice. They might blame themselves. Now 10 years from now, their expectations will be higher, right? They'll be satellite and 5G and the hardware will be better. And now you're going to have a better I think, but you basically will be able to you won't be able to get away with it then. You can get away with it now, you can't get away with it then. But it's a bad business decision to throw money at that, right?
Yeah, you don't want to overinvest. I mean, that's just that's wasted money. That's for sure. That's a
Yeah,
good point.
yeah. What's the coolest game you're playing right now, other than what you're building? I know that's probably you're dog fooding that probably the most. What any cool games you're spending time on these days?
So to my surprise, because I've never played this kind of game before, I've been playing a lot of. I'm sure you've probably played it with like your kids, nieces, nephews, whatever. It's Smash Brothers, fighting game, with all the Nintendo character lineup, right? And it turns out that it's a much deeper game than I expected. And a buddy of mine from work got me into it, and I've been playing it. And it's an online game. I mean, you can play it offline, but I mean, or on a LAN. But the online experience has been really educational as I try to sort of reverse engineer all of the engineering mistakes that they made that yield the customer experience, the user experience that I'm having, right? Which is, perpetual, lag and outages and strange artifacts, things like, scaling with the sun is a common problem, right? Like your
Yep.
customers go to sleep because most of them are in a particular time zone. And so what do you do with all your spare server capacity, right? How do you deal with all of your servers suddenly being over provisioned by 95%? Because
Yeah.
your cluster size was the same at midnight as it is at noon, and your player base has gone down by 90%, right? And so you wind up with a really crummy, user experience, which because you can't find matches, right?
Yeah.
So it's been interesting to sort of. I mean, like a couple of times, my buddy Nelson and I have like vowed to go to Nintendo and fix their cloud, right? Just because we're so frustrated with the experience. And they're one of the biggest, richest companies in the world. I mean, I don't know if you know, but like Japan owns 8 out of 10 of the biggest IP franchises, intellectual property franchises on Earth, right? They're bigger than Disney and Marvel and Star Wars put all together. Pokemon Go is, right? I mean, it's insane, and they can't get their reliability right. This huge company, they can't. They're struggling with it, and
You think it's fixable though? Like that's what I always kind of wonder is like is unreliability a law of nature or can we actually fix it?
it's always fixable, man. I mean, it's just like optimization, right? You don't do it until you meet. I mean, don't be dumb, but you don't go and try to like put a lot of resources on it until you know you need it, right? And then you pull out your profiling tools, you're monitoring, you're alerting, whatever. You look at your data, you figure out where you need to apply the resources, and you get it fixed. And
Yeah.
it's constant accumulation of technical debt that you need to continually pay down, right? And you need to be serious about stuff like load tests and failure modeling and all these things to try to make sure that you really are prepared for accidental way. You could become a victim of your own success, right? It was kind of a catchphrase at Google, right, that we ran into all the time, is if your product wasn't engineered up front. And that's why it would take 6 months to launch a product that was already finished at Google.
Right. Well, and it's
More months.
cyclical though, right? It's cyclical for these products because when they first start, your first problem is to build it, make it good enough that people want to use it, right? Whether it's a game or an app, right? You got to get enough people that want to use it. And then once you get people using it, then you got to make sure that it doesn't fall over when they're using it. And then once you get that stabilized, then you need to go and add more features so that more people come, and it goes on. It's an infinite game of a feedback loop.
That's how it works today.
Yeah.
And how it should work is you should design to be available by default. It should be, look, people aren't going to do it unless it's the easiest way to do it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if it's harder to design for availability, then people will put it off. And that's what they do. And then it becomes cyclic, like you said, right?
Well, you agree now it's easier to put an app into a cloud that has security, power, fault tolerance, network failover, and all that stuff. It's easier to do that today than it is to stick a server under your desk, right? So I mean that is in a way like more reliability by default from just from cloud computing, but you don't think that's enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I'm never ever satisfied with the state of the art. I mean, that's been the sort of theme of my blog for 20 years, right? Is I'm always angry that we could be doing better. But yeah, you're right. I used to run my game server as a machine under my desk, okay? And then I went through several years of hauling this giant machine into a data center, right, in downtown Seattle. And it was horrible. So yeah, cloud computing has advanced it quite a bit. Your VM reboots itself automatically. You just write a little script or something. And so, yeah, things are better.
Things are better. The hard drives are failing. You have no idea anymore. That's good. But you're right. There is still, no matter how good it gets, I think the reason, my belief is the reason that the expectations, people get used to it. People get used to it. I think this is what happened by the way, with the pandemic. Everybody's used to the internet working great now, right? Their whole life is DoorDash and Zoom calls like we're doing now. Like we live pretty close to each other actually, and we're like on the Zoom call right now because it's just easier for us to record this way, right? It's just easier. And we don't want to go back to pre-pandemic, quality levels because if you think about it, a lot of investment has been made in the last 12, 18 months to deal with the fact that the volume has gone up dramatically. So it gets better, but then getting better attracts more usage, and that more usage then increases the demand. So it's I think it's just a never-ending journey.
It is. And the problem is you may write a hit, right? You may write a dud. I mean, there's billion-dollar companies out there that try to do a second game. Candy Crush, King never did come out with a successful game after that. But there's all kinds of games that just they come out of nowhere and there's a sensation, like Among Us, say, right? And you need to prepare in advance for being a hit, because by the time it starts to ramp up and that exponential growth, that viral growth starts hitting you from influencers and streamers and all that, it's going to be too late for you to be like, yeah, so how should we make our system reliable? That's like way too late, right? And that's why I was saying, I'm still shocked at how bad the state of the art is in terms of it, just raw GCP, raw AWS, raw Azure. They give you a lot of. One of the things I noticed about Google as an engineer when I got there was that there are hundreds and hundreds of knobs there for you to turn and tweak, and all of them are set to not performant, not reliable, right? That's the defaults, and you have to spend months tuning things to find the parameter that's like, my service doesn't suck parameter, right? That knob. And that situation exists today with GCP and AWS, right? It's like, why wouldn't they make it reliable by default? And they're like, well, everybody's got different needs. It's like, well, doesn't everybody need to be reliable? But that can cost money or whatever, there's assumptions, or you've got special workloads.
There's all sorts of different patterns and trade-offs and different. I mean, I think there is definitely some truth that making systems less reliable. There is an argument to be made for making certain systems less reliable and to free up resources for the things that truly must be more reliable. And actually, I think the other point is, and you were kind of saying this before, reliability is really an outcome from resiliency and redundancy and good design and having the data. You can't sprinkle on reliability just like you can't sprinkle on quality or security, right? Reliability is an emergent outcome from a set of processes. So I agree with you. That it would be great if that was possible, and I think it does. We are getting better, but we also have to focus on the process, right? How do we get there? Not just the outcome that we want.
I mean, there is an argument to be made. My CTO, the guy that hired me to grab, Theo Vasilakis, he invented Dremel, which is BigQuery. Okay, he's a high power Googler. He was a CTO at Grab for a couple of years, and he had a saying. He said, your service should go out to production on day one with 1.9 of availability. Right? And it was a little bit of hyperbole, right? But I mean, he was trying to get people to say, hey, look, you don't know that your service is going to get adopted. Don't over-engineer it to begin with. And this is the fundamental tension that you and I have been discussing. It's been a thread through this entire talk, right? Which is how much do you invest, and how do you make that trade-off between over-preparing and under-preparing, because both of them are really bad outcomes. Yeah.
Doomsday prepper, right? Versus
go out and
I don't know, a day hiker who doesn't even put on sunscreen, right? Like there's two extremes here of how prepared you want to be, and it's a good point. Balance is the key. Balance is the key, and also I think understanding the patterns that have come before you too. I think that's reinventing stuff from scratch, everything being a special snowflake, right? Versus using things that are proven either methodologies, tools, etc. I think this is why open source has become so powerful too, right? Because you get the benefit of everyone thrashing on the systems to improve them. So
I'll give you one reliability tip for the day, all right?
Tell me, what's the one reliability tip from Steve Yegge?
So if you're a startup and you have customers who love your product, okay, they will be very tolerant of outages. And so if you don't have a system in place where, which I don't, for basically CI/CD, right? You have to bring your server down and bring it back up again if there's like a maintenance emergency or something, right? Then you just tell all your players, I'm giving everyone 10,000 gold because I got to do a reboot. They're like, yeah, reboot. Okay, that's how you set expectations. Okay, if you can actually reward your customers for their patience through your outage, yeah, you never know what's going to work for your company, and everybody's looking for a panacea, right? Everyone's looking for a silver bullet. Everyone's looking for the advice that's going to get them through it, and the answer is there's no shortcuts. You got to figure out what works for you and keep after it and keep digging yourself out of that technical debt.
So if I was to summarize, it's pay your customers your error budget, I think is what you just said.
Yes. That's a good way to say it.
Well, let's leave it there, Steve. It was so great to see you, man. And we got to get together in person and grab a beer or something. It'll be fun.
Yeah, man. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. All right, everybody out there. This is Kit Merker from Noble 9 signing off.